There is quite a lot of photographs out there, in galleries, in albums, in shoeboxes, online, and they can all be divided into 3 categories. The good ones, the bad ones, and why the hell were these shot? I don't like, because I don't like to talk about things I don't like. I might mention them, but I won't go into depth with them. I'm an introvert, like I said in many videos before this. I'm not much of a people person, in meaning of I don't like being around strangers that much. I don't like being seen that much. And even though I talk a lot, it's not the one thing I love to do with strangers. I don't really love to sit down and talk with a lot of strangers that I don't know. Sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's just utterly scary. Or maybe that's why I do street photography. Well, anyway, since I'm an introvert, I just sometimes love to sit in my own corner of the world, watching the people and time go by, with a cup of coffee in my hand, and more often than not a camera beside me. I just love sitting in that corner. And now we're talking a metaphorical corner, not a real street corner. And just observe people, situations, how people behave in certain situations, how certain situations begins and comes up because people behave the way they do. And by sitting there in my metaphorical corner, looking at people and situations, my brain kind of starts going haywire with making up histories and stories about what's going on. And that in itself makes me a firm believer that by sitting and studying others, you can learn a lot about yourself too. Sometimes it's just fascinating what stories and narratives my brain comes up with when I watch and study people. What I don't like is loud people and brags about how fantastic, amazing and godlike they are. And unfortunately there is a lot of those people around the world today. Most of them are called influencers. Others are called just human beings. And it's just about the exact same thing with music, movies and photographs or art. I don't need or want a photograph screaming at me with colors. I don't need the photograph writing its own story on my nose. Just as in music and movies, I like that slow build where I can make my own story, and I have to really listen and watch and see what's going on. Because those yelling and screaming photographs, they don't speak to me, they don't say anything to me. Instead, give me a silent photograph. A photograph with depth, that makes me create my own story within the frames of the photograph. That way I can sit and look at the photograph for hours. Who are the people in the photographs? What environment is it shot in? What happened in that environment? Who built the houses? Who lived in the houses? I can go through many cups of coffee just looking at one of those photographs. And like I said, it's the same thing with movies. And that, I think, is why I prefer movies from the 60s and 70s, 80s and possibly the 90s, that doesn't scream out the story or the narrative in the first 5 minutes of the movie. I mean, come on, I still have popcorn left after 10 minutes. And I like those movies that kind of drags in the beginning, builds up a story, builds up a momentum, builds up suspense, making me create my own thing in my head. And then at the end, boom, there comes the climax. And there is the ending, and that gives me a lot more than just watching the next Fast and the Furious 15 movie or whatever they're up to now. And it's the same thing with music. That's why I absolutely love classical music. I absolutely love instrumental jazz. And I do love progressive metal. Like Queensryche, Evergrey, Meshuggah, Dream Theater. Because that kind of music draws me into it and makes me think about the music, make me feel something when my mind goes to work. And that is a lot more rewarding for me to watch and listen to than any piece of pop music written in the last 35 years. Pop music stopped being good by the end of the 80s. Now come to think of it, I do believe I talked about this in an earlier video, but I found a quote that still lives in rent-free inside my head, that loud people rarely have something to say, or that people that talk a lot rarely have a lot to say. When silent people talk, they have a lot to say. And I think that's me, in some way. I rarely open my mouth until I have something valid to say. At least in an argument. Here on YouTube it's just blabbering. But in an argument, I never open my mouth until I have something valid to say. And I don't brag about myself. Even though I am the best photographer in the world, I wouldn't say it on anything like YouTube or something like that. That would be really ridiculous, right? So, my friends, followers, minions, and others who watches this channel, I'd like to have your opinion on what a good photograph or a good movie or a good piece of music is. Are you on board with me with this? You don't like things screaming at you. You want to find your own narrative, your own story, your own, well, perspective of things. Or do you like when things just scream at you with colors, with narrative, just writing everything down right in front of you? So, I bid you farewell. I say sayonara. Jag säger hej då. And you'll see me in the next video. Adios. For nu.